What's interesting, especially for some of the modern Hanbalis that attack Imam al-Ghazali, is that the most important Hanbali text that's studied by students of the Hanbali madhab is called Rawdat al-Nadhir, which is Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi's famous book. It's studied in Saudi Arabia now, in Medina, and that is basically an abridgment of the Mustasfa. So what makes Imam al-Ghazali unique? There's a few things that he does in Usul al-Fiqh. First of all, he is the first Usuli scholar to put logic as a propedeutic science, in other words, an introductory science to the study of Usul al-Fiqh. Some people find this odious and actually blame him for this. But one of the great scholars of this period who taught in Medina and wrote a book called Adwa al-Bayan, which is Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, Muhammad al-Amin al-Shinqiti, one of the great scholars that was produced by the land of Mauritania. He taught many, many years in Medina, and because some of the ulama, or most of the ulama there, actually prohibited or considered logic prohibited, because he felt it was so important as a subject, and because they wouldn't permit him to teach it, he wrote a book on logic and just changed all the names. And they used that book at the university in Medina. It was basically just a book on logic, but he just changed all the names and called it Adab al-Bahth wa al-Munadhara. He didn't call it Mantiq, but it's basically logic. So Imam al-Ghazali introduced logic. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a book, Radd al-Mantiqiyin, which is called Refutation of the Logicians. And Ibn Taymiyyah had a problem with logic, but he did not have a problem. What he had a problem with was the metaphysics of logic. Although he criticizes other aspects of logic, and it's a 2-volume book. It's been translated into English by Wa'il al-Hallaq, at least the abridgment that Imam Suyuti did. Imam Suyuti was also somebody who attacked the science of logic. I have a suspicion his logic teacher stole a book from him and attributed it to himself. When he was 17 years old, he was very upset about it. It was a book he wrote in Usul, and I have a little bit of a suspicion that might have left a bitter taste in him about logic. But the idea that logic is a bid'ah is really absurd, because logic, we all use logic, either poorly or well. But we're logicians. Every human being is a logician, because we're all reasoning. There's reasons why we do things. In the same way, we're all grammarians. We're either poor grammarians or we're using grammar well. But everybody is using grammar, like the man in The Bourgeois Gentleman, I think, who's amazed that he's been speaking prose all his life, right? When the man explains to him the difference between prose and poetry, that people don't know what they're doing because they don't have names for it. But we're all using predicates and adverbs and adjectives. We all have syntax. We use it well or we use it poorly. If we've studied grammar, or if we're in a country where standard language is usually grammatically correct. The United States, generally, the standard language is reasonably good. In classes in England, it's better. But Americans use poor grammar all the time. There's an argument amongst linguists that there's no such thing as poor grammar, it's just what people speak. But those are people that say that are relativists, and really, in the end, they're nihilists, because rules are important, and we can't speak table, walk, night, late, come, why not? If I start talking like that, you're not going to understand anything I say. So there's a reason why we speak logically, grammatically, and those of us who speak rhetorically effectively, we speak persuasively. So these are all important sciences that were studied. And so what Imam al-Ghazali understood. Ibn Taymiyyah in his Rad' ala al-Mantiqiyin says that المنطق لا يفيد يستغني عنه الذكي ولا يفيد الغبي, that a really intelligent person doesn't need it, and it won't benefit a stupid person because it's too difficult. Well, that's nice for, the bell curve, all those people that are over in the standard deviation over here, and then those over here, but all the people in the middle that it's beneficial for, he's forgetting all those people. So it's true, Sahaba did not know tasawwurat and tasdiqat and qiyas. They didn't know syllogisms, but they used them, and the Prophet used them. And Imam al-Ghazali wrote a book called Qistas al-Mustaqim, proving Ibn Taymiyyah says that أبو حامد يدعي أنه تعلم المنطق من القرآن والحقيقة أنه تعلمه من ابن سينا. He claims that he learned logic from the Quran, but the truth is he learned it from Ibn Sina. But if you read his book Qistas al-Mustaqim, he shows you that the Quran is using syllogisms. And there have been over 30 syllogisms identified in the Quran, usually enthymemes. And one of the things he shows is that they're the 5 most important, the golden syllogisms are used in the Quran. And so the prophets used logic. And when they reasoned, they're reasoning with logic. And the Quran is speaking to us rationally. The Quran is telling us to look, to reflect, to think, to use our aql. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ الَّذِينَ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Those who reflect, those who think. So he felt logic was very important, and he said that the early people didn't need it in the same way they didn't need grammar, because Umar radiallahu anhu did not need to know the 22 mansubats because he didn't make mistakes in his grammar. He didn't need to know the 11 marfu'at. He didn't need to know the 3 majrurat. He knew those. He knew them sariqatan, like the Arabs said, لَسْتُ بِنَحْوِيًا يُلُوكُ لِسَانُهُ وَلَكِنْ سَلَقِيٌّ أَقُولُ فَأُعْرِبُ. I'm not a grammarian who stammers as he speaks, trying not to make mistakes. He said, I'm saliqi, I'm a pure Arab that speaks and it's correct. And this is the way the early people were. So they didn't need grammar, they didn't need logic, because they had it by fitrah. And the Prophet uses qiyas many times. In the hadith, he uses analogical reasoning, which Ibn Taymiyyah did accept as the reasoning of the fuqaha. He accepted analogical reasoning. He had a problem with deductive reasoning because he didn't believe in universals, and he was really the first nominalist, as far as I can tell, in history. I mean, there's a debate about Boethius and Porphyry, because they only indicate that there's a problem with universals. But Ibn Taymiyyah was clearly had a problem with the concept of universals. And there's reasons for that also. And to be fair to him, in many ways, he was attempting to defend the tradition from the onslaught of very dangerous Greek ideas and dangerous occultic ideas. So Imam al-Ghazali, it's important to remember that he introduces logic as being central to our tradition. And after Ghazali, logic becomes one of the primary studies in the madrasa tradition. This is something that some of the modern, whatever you want to call them, ideologues or critics of al-Ghazali really have a problem with. And there's people that like to purify Islam, do some type of ethnic cleansing of Hellenistic thought from the Islamic tradition. But the truth is, the Prophet said, al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. Wisdom is the lost property of the believer. And he said, and it's attributed to him, and Ibn Abd al-Barr, who was called Hafidh al-Maghrib, one of the greatest muhaddithin in the history of Islam, he quotes this hadith, and the meaning is true, but Al-Hafidh Ibn Abd al-Barr doesn't suggest that it's not from the Prophet ﷺ, but he said, "Utlub al-ilm walaw fi as-Sin," seek knowledge even unto China. So wherever knowledge is, we benefit from it. And the Muslims benefited greatly from Aristotle. Ibn Sina, Imam al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah said,